the thing is, I'm trying to point out that many scholars don't believe in the Bible. But as a discovery comes along, some of them will accept it straight off like, wow, this is exactly as it says in the Bible. Many archaeologists have been like that. Garstang and others who have excavated and found this is exactly what we see in the Bible. Where others will say, like with this David thing, I am not so certain that David existed. And even today, there's a few scholars that still refuse to believe that David was a real person. Hi, welcome to Evidence for Faith. It's your host, Michael Lane. I am so glad you're joining me for this new series. Short series, there's only 3 lessons in this, but they're a little bit lengthy. But this is going to be a phenomenal series, and I hope you stay with me through this whole thing. What this lesson is, the series is called David and the Giants. David and the Giants. So, it's going to be a 3-part series, I said. The first part, we're going to be talking about David himself. King David from the Bible. Did he really live? And what evidence is there of him? So that's the first lesson. King David, the evidence. The second lesson will be about Goliath. We all know that famous story, Goliath, and we'll talk about Goliath specifically in the Philistines. Then the third part of the lesson, we're going to go to the giants, of which Goliath was one, and what evidence is there about giants? We see this in the Bible, the Nephilim and others. What evidence is there that's been found in science and archaeology throughout the world? What evidence do we have that these people really, there were people that were giants actually existing, that it's not a myth? Because that's what we want to get into. We want to everybody to understand that the Bible is not a book of fairy tales. It's not a book of myths. These events actually happened, and archaeology can back up a lot of this, and that's what I want to present to you. So in this first lesson, that's what we're covering, David, the evidence. And I hope you'll stay tuned for the new ones when they come out on Goliath and then the one on the giants themselves. But as we get into this, I want to start off, as you often know, that I begin many times with a story to introduce this. And I have a doozy for you, a personal story that happened. This was many years ago, back in the 1990s, when I was teaching in Illinois. I was teaching biological sciences. At our school, as with many schools in the Chicago area and Chicago itself, there used to be a club that many schools had. I don't know if it still runs or not today, because this was a long time ago. But it was called a Saturday Scholars Club. Now, Saturday Scholars, that sounds maybe a little odd for a name of a club, unlike math club or chess club or something like that, or 4-H club. Saturday Scholars was a club that students just couldn't join. You had to be invited and picked by teachers. The math and the science teachers in these schools would pick students to join this club, give them the offer if they wanted to join this club. It was also limited how many people could join. We had normally around 30, maybe 35 students. And what we did, as all the schools did, we picked the top math and science students in the school. And we would meet on Saturday mornings, thus the name Saturday Scholars. We would meet, and then we would get on a bus and we'd drive up to a suburban school, had a huge auditorium, it was a huge school, and at this auditorium we would be listening to a scholar. Each week was a different scholar, each weekend, each Saturday. And we had scholars that were geneticists, we had some that were astrophysicists, physicists themselves, we had geologists, we had medical doctors, all sorts of different fields of science. And this was a club that was geared for people who we thought were probably going to go to secondary education, college, and so forth to get a good education in some type of scientific or math field. That's what this club was about, to inspire kids to get into this and to hear from experts in the field what they were doing, you know, the science and stuff behind it, to try to instill some interest into the student body. Now, that's what the club was about. And I did this for several years. I don't know, 9, 10 years. I held this club. Well, back in the early 90s, I was invited to be part of the panel of the teachers in the Chicagoland that got to pick the scholars that would come. And so we had all different people from everywhere, of course. And the thing is, I had a student who was a junior this one year in school. So he was on his second to the last year of public ed. And the thing is, he wanted to be an archaeologist. I mean, he really wanted to be an archaeologist. And he complained to me that, you know, these Saturday Scholar things like last year and stuff, we never get archaeologists. That's the field I want to go into. Well, we searched around and we got one. So we had on this one Saturday an archaeologist who specialized in the Philistines. And that's very important for this story. He came and he was going to be the presenter. Now, the thing is, the way this was set up, we would get to school early, and I mean early in the morning, and we would load up on a bus and we'd drive to this place. We get out, we go into the auditorium. All these different schools, there's over 1,000, probably closer to 1,500 to 2,000 people that were there easily. But each student, as you walked in, and each teacher, when you walked into the auditorium, and you would sit together in a student body with your teacher, your sponsor, you all sit together. Each person is given a 3x5 card. Now, the reason for the 3x5 card, this presenter who's going to be talking that day is going to talk for about 90 minutes. Then we're going to take about a break, 45-minute break or whatever, and during the break we go to the cafeteria of the school. There, oh yes, we had Dunkin' Donuts, we had chocolate milk, there was coffee for those who like ground up bean juice. I prefer tea, and we had our little time of just relaxing and getting to know each other, and et cetera, and putting on a lot of carbohydrates in our bodies. Anyway, during this time, if you had written a question down on your 3x5 card, there was a special box over by the doorway. You could drop your question in. And then after we have our donut break and we get all sugar high, we go back in for like a 45-minute question answer series. Then we went home, went back to the school and dispersed from there. Well, on this day, the way this one worked out, normally, my students would sit in the center of this auditorium. Smack dab the center is where I always like to have my students. 30, 35 of us would sit together. But because we had an archaeologist coming, and the students knew beforehand, before each Saturday, the bio of the person was handed out to the students, so they knew who was coming. They could start get their minds focused on this type of a presentation of the science or whatever he is presenting. Well, because we had this student who wanted to be an archaeologist, he insisted that we sit down front, right in front of the stage, first row. I generally do not like to do that, even if I go to a motion picture. I don't like to sit on the front row and you're looking up like that. I didn't want that, but he was so excited about this, so I consented and we sat down in the front row. And I sat right in the middle of my students, but I'm on the front row. I had students on either side and behind me. During the presentation, this guy came out and he did a fabulous job talking about the Philistines, the origin of the Philistines. He had pottery and all sorts of artifacts that he was explaining. It was magnificent. He did an excellent job. But during this time, I pulled out my 3x5 card. And as everybody is listening to him, the students that are sitting around me see me take my pen and I write on my card, "Do we know the exact location of King David's tomb?" Now, because I had written that right there in the presence of my students, the students all sitting around me all saw my question. Break came, we go, let's get the donuts. We eat the donuts. There at the donut time, when we walked in, I stuck my card into the box with the other students who had put down some questions. And I didn't think he would answer mine at all. But anyway, we went and had our treats, get our carbohydrates, our sugar high and everything. Then it was time for us to go back in the auditorium. When we went back to sit, you're supposed to sit in the same seat you were for the first session, and we're sitting down front. Well, the guy comes back out and he's presenting. And the first thing he does when he comes out and he's got his stack of a few cards he's going to answer, and the first card, the first question he answers is, "Do we know the exact location of King David's tomb?" Now, immediately, the students sitting next to me are like, "Hey, that's your question, that's your question. Calm down, calm down, calm down." And so then something happened I wasn't prepared for. The fellow said, "May I ask, who's the person who wrote this question?" Now, I did not want to raise my hand or anything, but my students are sitting next to me like, hey, it's yours. Get your hand up, get your hand up. Settle down, et cetera, et cetera. Well, he could not miss the commotion right in front of him. And so he takes a few steps to the edge of the stage and he looks down to me and he said, "Sir, are you the person who wrote this question?" I go, "Yes, I am." "Would you stand up?" So I didn't want to, but I stood up. He says, now let me understand this. Let me ask you, if I can, a personal question. Are you one of these born-again Christians? Now, what do you do when your faith is put on the spot like that in front of thousands? Well, I very proudly said, yes, I am. He said, correct me if I'm wrong. You believe that the Bible is the inspired Word of God, that anything found in the Bible actually occurred. All the characters in the Bible are real, and all the events in the Bible are real, because you think it's inspired by God Himself. Is that correct, sir? I said, yes, that's right. And he says, well, thank you, sir. You can have a seat. And I sat down, and I was just like, oh, gee. Then he said this. I hate to be the one to inform you. David never existed. There never was a David. David is a mythical person. And he went on to say, we think that if there ever was a David, it wasn't a person, it was a nomadic tribe that they called themselves David, moving through the Levant area and stuff of Mesopotamia. No, sir. David never existed. Thus, there is no David's tomb. And as I sat there, I sort of just mumbled, well, that's what you say. Not much was said. Students were very respectful. They didn't say anything, really. We get, after the presentation, I don't remember anything else after that. We get back on the bus, and now I'm alone with my students. And at that time, some of my students come up and they said, how did you feel being that he treated you like that and that he did that to you? And I said, well, I don't think he's correct. Well, he's an archaeologist in this field. You're just a biologist. And I said, archaeology is sort of a new science, I told him. I said, there's very little archaeology that's been discovered yet. I said, I just don't think they have discovered a lot of it, and I still believe that the Bible's real. I believe this guy's wrong in his conclusion that there is no David. And I remember telling him, I think archaeology will bear me out in years to come. Well, you might be wondering, why am I talking about this story and this little thing with David? There's a part 2 to this. Part 2 was happening like this. It was the next year. Well, that archaeologist was so popular with the student body, they insisted he come back. And so we invited him back. I did not sit in the front row this time. My students and I, we sat in the very last row, as far back as I could get away from the wall, or to the wall up there, away from the stage. That's where we sat. Then the MC came out and he presented introduced who the speaker was. And when the speaker came out this time, this is what happened. He came out, he was extremely excited as he walked out on the stage, not like he was the last time. He was very excited about something, and before he began his presentation, he says, I must start by beginning to tell you something that was just discovered in Israel. Up in the north area, in what we call Tel Dan, an ancient city about as far north in Israel as you can get, they were digging there and they found a stone that actually has the name David on it. He went on by saying, we now know that King David was an actual person. There's no doubt about it. I'm sitting there and my students were like, I remember one of my students says, hey, stand up and shout, do you remember me? I said, I'm not going to do that. That's not respectful. That's not cool. No, I'm not going to do that. But that's what happened. And it was funny because on the ride home, we talked more about this and everything. And I told him, yeah, the Bible is true. So the thing is, I'm trying to point out that many scholars don't believe in the Bible. But as a discovery comes along, some of them will accept it straight off like, wow, this is exactly as it says in the Bible. Many archaeologists have been like that. Garstang and others who have excavated and found this is exactly what we see in the Bible. Where others will say, like with this David thing, I am not so certain that David existed. And even today, there's a few scholars that still refuse to believe that David was a real person. So anyway, that's how this whole thing started. And it shows us that there is evidence that you can find in archaeology that has proved or has shown tremendously strong evidence that these biblical stories like David took place. So in this lesson, what we're going to do today in this lesson is we're going to examine evidence pertaining directly to King David. that he was not a myth, he was an actual person. The first piece of this, and we're going to look at these major pieces of discovery that actually have David's name on it. Then we're going to look at some secondary pieces of evidence that help support the first ones, that David did exist. But the first one I want to talk about was that discovery that archaeologists, the Saturday Scholars talked about, a discovery at a place called Tel Dan. And today this is called the Tel Dan inscription. And we have a picture you're being able to see here. It's just a stone. What this is, it was a stone that was found. Actually, it was a monument at one time that had been broken up and then reused to build a wall. It was in 1993 that archaeologist Avram Biran and his team recovered this part of this stele, or that's a monument. They found this monument, and the thing is, it was broken into pieces. Broken into pieces, they would use stones and recycle stones into other things, and it had been recycled into a wall. And in 1994, he found more parts of the stele with more things on it. But the thing is, when they found this and they started to clean it, they immediately noticed, oh my gosh, there's inscriptions on it. Dr. Biran and others got very excited over this, finding written words on this stone, on this monument. So much excited, he cleaned this thing up, and to his amazement, what he found this monument was representing, it was a monument talking about how King Hazael of Aram, that would be what we call Syria, he was recounting his victory over the kings of Israel and the kings of Judah at a battle that was called Ramoth Gilead. Now, this is mentioned in the Bible. It's recorded in 2 Kings chapter 8. And using 1 Kings chapter 6 as a basis for a timeline that we've talked about in other lessons, this would have taken place around 841 BC. And this all fits the biblical story really well. Now, in the inscription, what you see in the inscription are the names of different kings. King Hadad of Aram. There's King Ahab of Israel. His name appears on this. There's King Joram, who's the son of King Ahab. There's King Azariah of Judah, the son of King Jehoram. And he's also called, because he's from Judah, of the house of David. It mentions the house of David. Actually, in Hebrew, it's Beit David. David is how you would say it. That's David's name, David. And it also mentions about a guy named, a general whose name was Jehu. He's the general who later assassinates Joram and Azariah after the battle. Though King Hazael, he claims and takes credits for all their death, but it's his interpretation of what's going on. Now, this major discovery with all these names on here show that these people, these biblical characters, actually did exist, that this story, this battle took place, it was true, and that the house of King David is actually seen on here. Now, we're not talking about a literal house, talking about the genealogies, the house of David, the genealogy of King David is what's being mentioned. But the thing is, as this was discovered, is that archaeologists at Saturday Scholar says, for the first time, we have evidence, archaeological evidence, and his statement was irrefutable, that King David actually lived. And the thing is, they found this not in the Bible, they found it from a non-biblical source, a monument up in Tel Dan. Now that was significant, a major discovery. It's considered one of the major discoveries of the last century. This was just amazing. The battle itself took place about 150 years after King David was ruling in Israel. This all fits, the point I'm trying to make here is it fits the time frame that the Bible gives of when these things all took place.